Hi, I'm Tara from the Marathon Mates. Are you wanting to run the major marathons but find that it is too expensive to do so? Are you looking for a cheaper way to travel the world and to run big events? Well, we're here to help you. On this episode, we will share our tips to help you travel the world and to run the major marathons as cheaply as possible. We've been there and done that and reckon we might just have the answers that you are looking for. We are also the only podcast with 4 6-star medalists that are co-hosts, and this is the Flying Runner Podcast. Are you ready to run? Let's go.
Welcome to the thrilling world of the Flying Runner, brought to you by the Marathon Mates.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the Flying Runner. I'm Tara from the Marathon Mates and this is episode number 95. Now we know that travelling overseas and doing the major marathons is not a cheap exercise. So on this episode we are going to dissect each of the world marathon majors to see if we can do them cheap. We'll look at travel, accommodation, race entries and of course food. Because of our past experiences of running the major marathons, we think we may know a thing or two about how you can save a few dollars when doing these trips. I can't wait to discuss this with my marathon mates, but before we do any of that, let me introduce you to my mates tonight. We've got Lucia, Tony, and of course Tim, my better half. Guys, how was your week and how is your running been going? Lucia, let's start with you.
It's been a bit of a lackluster week. So first of all, I've got to apologise because on last week's episode, I said to our listeners that I'd be at the Sydney Marathon Run Club, which was yesterday, Sunday, but I've been sick for a few days. So it's been no running, hence why I sound so lovely, more than normal. So it's been a very quiet week. I've done no running since Tuesday, which is going to be interesting because I've got the Hocker 10K on Sunday. The aim was to give it a good crack. It's a hard course. Part of it does the Mara course. But I'm going to see how I feel. If I'm still feeling a bit congested, which I hope after a week, God, I'm not, because I'll lose my marbles. It will just be a nice, easy run. So yeah, I just need to ease back into it.
Excellent. Just listen to that body and make sure you do the right thing by you.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And Tony, how was your week?
Yeah, actually, very similar to Lucia. Sharon and I weren't feeling great over the weekend, and I wanted to run 21K on Saturday. And I caught up with an old mate of mine. We watched the Dragons, and there were 3 games of footy on the weekend, and my Dragons got beaten by Lucia's Roosters by the looks, so quite badly. And yeah, we had a really nice dinner and a couple of drinks, but I was still in bed, I reckon, by 9:30. So it wasn't like it was a out of control evening. But on the Saturday, I just felt like I did have an out of control evening, and I just couldn't work it out. I just not good. So I got out and ran 5K, and then pulled up stumps, and Sharon did the same thing. She actually ran a little bit more than me, so a tick in the box for Sharon. And then on Sunday, I really was nice and healthy all day Sunday, and Saturday I was nice and healthy after that, and then I went out and ran on Sunday, and I was still quite ill, so I only did 5K. So just tried to be really, really easy on myself. So really looking forward to getting back into some level of consistency this week, I think. So yeah, so it wasn't a great week for me training wise, but yeah, hopefully this week a little bit better. I've got the QE2 10K Classic coming up in 20 days. So That's a 10K run. And then, of course, I have the Brisbane half in 34 days. So I better get some of that mojo back. So,
And are you doing the GC30 as the half as well? You're not
No.
doing that one now? No? Okay.
no, not me.
Not you? Excellent. And
Yeah.
Tim, you want to chat about what you've done this week?
Yeah, we had a bonus week this week. So this weekend we were meant to be going camping, and unfortunately the weather didn't play nice. So Anzac Day long weekend and joint birthday celebrations for somebody on this podcast. So we were meant to go camping, weren't we, Tara? But didn't go camping, and so we got some extra runs in. But in addition to that, we did park run at Warner Lakes, and it was our 450th park run each.
Round of applause.
So yeah, so what's that? I think 450 park runs and about 75 volunteers each, or something like that. So we're getting close to the 500 mark. Another year or so, and we'll have the 500 done and 100 volunteers at the same time. So that's what we're aiming to do. Long run wise, we got the extra run in. Long run, Tara, you did 15 yesterday?
19.
Or 19? 19 yesterday. And I knocked over 24 Ks. So getting back, I got a bit more speed into it yesterday. I'm feeling a lot better. The body's feeling good today. So everything's working the way it should. So really, really happy at the moment.
Excellent. Well done, guys. And we have got some news about some extra 6-star medalists that we've had over since Boston. Does anyone want to have a chat about those guys?
Yeah, just quickly. No, well, those who listened last week would have heard that we were recording just before Boston kicked off. So we didn't talk too much about Boston. But well done to our friends Kylie and Mark, Andrew and Lisa, Catherine, and especially Claudia, who's been on our episodes before. If you recall, I can't remember the episode number, but she's a vision impaired runner who came on and talked about her experience. She completed Boston as well, as did Robert Wang, who's been on our podcast before as well. So well done to all those guys who competed in Boston. And then just overnight, we had London Marathon, and a couple of our good mates who listened to the show, Reese and Mary and Bronwyn, all completed London overnight and did well as well, despite the hot conditions of 22 degrees Celsius. So, and also Team Kerr was on that, was running yesterday as well, who have also been on this podcast as well.
And let's not forget Hayley.
And Hayley.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So she's going to be one of our future guests. So listen out for her one when that comes on.
Sorry, Tara, some of the photos that Lisa's posted, absolutely amazing. God, he takes some great photos.
Reese does?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
So Reese has been on the show. That's right. I forgot. He's been on our show earlier this year as well. So well done, Reese.
Yeah. And Reese is known as the Running Paparazzi for anyone who would like to have a look at his photos on Facebook or Instagram. You can have a look at those on Running Paparazzi. So also we've got episode number 100 approaching very, very fast. So if anyone's got any ideas for what we should do for this milestone episode, and if you would like to put some input in, please feel free. We're always open to suggestions and ideas. So I think that's about it now. So it's about time we talk about the news. What do you reckon?
Might be a good idea.
Excellent.
But hang on, I think we've just missed one thing though, because Tim mentioned earlier that it was someone's birthday the other day on this podcast. It's not mine because mine's in September. It's not Tim's. It's
Mine's
not
November.
Tony's. November. Tony, when's your birthday again?
It's also in November.
Happy birthday to Tara for her birthday on Anzac Day.
Thank you very much, Lucia. That's very nice of you. I was sort of hiding that one under the radar, but Tim doesn't let it ever happen, unfortunately. So the year
and nor he shouldn't. And I think it was a good thing that camping was cancelled because personally, I can't think of anything worse than camping. I'm a princess.
See, camping is my rising tide.
Well, then you're screwed when we're talking about cheap Boston, cheap marathons on this episode.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about the news. So, Tim, what's been happening around the world this week?
Thanks, Tara. I'm just going to recap on the 2 races I mentioned for the news this week. That's what's dominating world running at the moment. Boston Marathon, as I said, we unfortunately missed the results last week. But by all reports, Boston turned on another awesome day with conditions meeting most of the runners' expectations on the day. It was a little bit warm, but not over the top warm, not as warm as it was last year for us, Tara and Lucia, but warm all the same. Good thing was all the races were run in very quick times and course records were set in the women's race. And I think it was also set in the men's race as well. And speaking of the men's race, the winner of the men's race, John Cora, I don't know if you guys saw any of the highlights from this event, but he fell at the start line. He took a really nasty tumble at the start. Within probably, 20 metres, 30 metres of the start line, went down. Whole heap of runners sort of running around him and over the top of him, was able to get back up and continue to get back into that lead pack. And some of the splits he did, his fastest splits were around the Newton Hills, and particularly Heartbreak Hill. They're saying it was probably the fastest split anyone's gone in the marathon race up Heartbreak Hill. So he's a genuine world-class elite runner. He won in Chicago last year. He is one of the absolute bests in the world. He ran Boston in 2:04:45, and he's now talking seriously about having a crack at the world record. So these guys are very good at not telling you what their plans are, but the question at the moment is, will he back it up and go to Chicago to try and set the world record or go for the world record in Chicago, or will he go to Berlin and have a crack in Berlin? So be interesting to see what happens there for John Korora. Second place was Alphonse Simbu from Tanzania, who ran it in 2:05:04. So he was about 20 seconds behind John. And then third place was Cybrian Kutut from Kenya, who also ran it in 2:05:04. So a pretty close finish there for second and third. Some notable ones there. Connor Mance from the US. He just keeps getting faster and faster, doesn't he, Tony, at 2:05:08. I think that's a new US record, or maybe very close to the US record.
Yeah. When you first raised the elite fields at Boston, I forgot which episode it was, but it was way back. I think I put a call out that Connor Mance was a good shot to win it. If I said win it, I don't know. But I think I said he was a really good show in this one. And I think his fourth placing indicates that. And what I also find interesting here is his training partner is Clayton Young, who came seventh. And traditionally if you think back to the American trials to see who would go to the Olympics, both of them fundamentally crossed the line together. First and second, and this time Connor had 2 minutes on him. So Connor is certainly really starting to show his potential, which is awesome.
It is awesome. In the women's results, as I said, Sharon Ladecki from Kenya won the event. She set a course record of 2 hours, 17 minutes and 22 seconds. She beat the defending champion, who's won it the last 2 years prior, in Helen Oberi. She beat Helen by about 20 seconds. And then third place was, here we go, I'll get the names here, Yalmazef Yahuluhalo from Ethiopia, so who ran it in 2:18:06. So again, a pretty solid race there from all the leaders there in good conditions. So really good to see that happen. Notable one there in the men's wheelchair event, Marcel Hug is a legend of the sport. He had his 8th win in Boston. Absolute legend, 1:21. He beat Daniel Romanchek, who's from the USA. Daniel's been a legend as well in the game. So it was quite good there. And then in the females, in the wheelchair division. Susanna Sacconi from the USA won it in 1 hour 35, followed by Catherine De Bruyne from Switzerland in 1 hour 36. And our favourite, Maddie DeRosio from Australia, came in 6th in 1 hour 49, quite some distance behind the winner, Scarconi. So pretty awesome there. I guess the other things there to notice is Desi Linden, one of our favourites, my favourite memory from 2018, winning in the wet, the Boston Marathon. She has announced now, I think she's about 40 years of age. She's announced that she is finished professional marathon running after the completion of Boston. And she's had a string of victories around the world. She's been one of those tough, nuggety runners who just gets in there and does the hard work and gets it done. So she's now retired from professional running immediately. And Paula Radcliffe, former world record holder, is now in the 6-star club with us. She has her name on the same board as us as a 6-star medalist. So she ran Boston with a time of 2 hours, 53:44 minutes, which is about 4 minutes quicker than the time she ran 6 weeks ago in Tokyo. So she looked a lot better when she crossed the finish line than she did in Tokyo as well.
Yeah, it's what I really enjoyed about Desi Linden's race was the respect and almost like the American runners right at the end of the race. They really celebrated her finish, which I thought was amazing. You know, after what that lady has given to the American world of running, I think it was a true mark of respect. So well done. Just another couple of things around Boston. They're not on the run sheet, but from all reports, the Boston Expo was quite poor again, which is disappointing. I saw one report where someone said they counted the stands and there was 10 or something. So I don't know how true or false that is, but from all reports. The one thing I found interesting is that a lot of the reason why the Boston Expo is the way it is because of the Adidas sponsorship. They control who goes to the expo. But then I heard through some of the influencer podcasts is that Adidas had a pop-up in Newbury Street. So in an old Forever 21 store. So I'm thinking to myself, they control what happens at the expo, but obviously they also want to have their own pop-up in Newbury Street. So I thought that was quite odd. Why don't they just loosen up and get whatever is happening in Newbury Street into the expo? And just the last little piece of absolute trivia that absolutely means nothing. And we talk about the Citgo sign there in Boston. And it's being moved, guys. It's being moved. Yeah. So back in 2018, I think there was a development called the Kenmore Square redevelopment, and the Citgo sign is being moved. But don't fret, it's actually going to be 120 feet moved and 30 feet higher. So I just thought I'd share that. So.
There's no longer 1 mile to go. It's 1 mile less 130 or plus 130 yards.
Well, yeah, it depends on which way it moves. So
yeah. I think the expo thing is probably a whole nother episode. Whether expos are done and dusted or not, I can tell you, it seems to be that marathon events are struggling to get people to come to their expos as exhibitors. So I just wonder if the days are done or dusted, or whether the marathon organisers are charging too much for the space and see it as another way to revenue raise.
Potentially.
And it's now to the detriment. I don't know.
I think it's an old model, and what you see on Newbury Street with the pop-ups and the influencers seems to be the current model that's working, you know, so maybe there's got to be a little bit of new thinking there. But I just thought it was really strange that Adidas sort of had a foot in both camps. You can't come in to the expo because we're the major sponsor, but we're going to hang around where you guys are because that's where all the cool kids. So
yeah, whereas like Chicago was a really good expo, lots of vendors there. And they let in the other ones. You see Hoka, you see Adidas, even though it's a Nike event, you see Brooks, you see all the other running ones. Are obviously not allowed to brand anything with the name of the event on it, but they're there. You can see their shoes, and that seems to work. Chicago was a really good one, but I found like even New York last year was a bit flat as well. But as I said, it's probably a topic for another episode. But
Absolutely.
moving on to London overnight. We had a bit of a watch party going last night, didn't we, Tony, with a few of the guys? And Lucia, you were on it for a bit as well, so it was good. I found it. I love London. I really love watching, and I think the timing for us is really good in London in that it's Sunday night our time. It's not too late, and so we got to see the race go pretty well. So in the women's, the event was run by former world record holder Tigist Asafa from Ethiopia. She ran a time of 2 hours, 15 minutes and 50 seconds. She has now set the fastest women's only race time ever in the history of the world. So it's a new world record for women's only racing. That means there's been no male pacers and no other men on the course to pace them along. So it again shows that she's world class. To just a Sefa, she beat Jocelyn Jepkosgei from Kenya, who really did die off, and I felt sorry for her as she was coming up the mall at the end because she looked exactly like how I feel at the end of every marathon. Her legs were just hanging in there. Her stride was shortened. It felt like concrete for her. I think that was her maiden marathon as well, her first marathon. She's a half marathon world record holder. She ran it in 2 hours, 18 minutes and 44 seconds. So Asafa won by about 3 minutes there. And then Tony Safan Hassan came third in 2 hours, 19. And something didn't look right with her from very early on, even before Tower Bridge. She was dropping back there a little bit. And we weren't sure whether it was just her playing her usual games, whether she was trying to set a different pace than the other girls. I guess we'll never really know. But it was a bit of a interesting one to see what happened there, hey?
Yeah, I thought that, I mean, we all know Safan's got a kick. And the thing that I really loved about Safan, even in the race, is that, and the difference between the second place and the third place as to how they ran down the final finishing stretch. Like, Safan sprints it. Like, she's no reason to sprint it, right? She's clear third. She's not going to get second. And she still sprinted at home. So it just shows her mentality as a runner. And I think Tigist Asafa had a great strategy to try and break her early. And I think that's ultimately what happened. Safan said, I'm going to hang back and I'm going to run it at my pace and I'm going to get her at the end. But by the time the end came, there was 3 minutes difference. So I think that there was some miscalculation on Safan, but a great race by Asafa, just very strategic and obviously and clearly very fit, prepared, and it was all part of a plan. So well done.
Yeah, 100%. In the men's, Sebastian Soya from Kenya won it in 2:02:27. He ended up beating Jacob Kiplumo from Kenya by about a minute, 2 hours 03. And in third place was Alexandra Munyano in 2:04. Tamarit Tola, the gold medalist from the Olympics last year, was fifth, and Eliud Kipchoge was sixth. And Andy Buchanan from Australia was 11th, I believe.
In
all up,
2:09:11 was Andy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of things I got out of that. There was a lead pack there of about 10 runners. For most of the race up until about the 25K mark, Kipchoge just started to fall off the pack at that pace. Only a little bit. He was probably only 10 metres behind. And there was a drink station there in Canary Wharf where they hit the 25K mark or thereabouts. And Sebastian Soare didn't take his drink. He just kept running through it and put on a bit of a gap. And before you know it, he was 100 metres in front within about a minute or two of that drink station. And he just kept expanding his lead. He's got some legs on him. For those who may recall, he won Valencia last year, and he's had some good results elsewhere as well. So he's a young runner on the rise. And between him and what's his name that won it in in Boston, John Carrera. I think they're the future. John Carrera and Sebastian Sora are the future of the sport, and both of them will push each other to go into the low 201s and even lower into 220s. So really impressive. But you know what? At 40 years of age, Kipchoge's still the GOAT. I was impressed with what he was looking at. He looked really fit. He looked strong. There's no excuses. He was beaten by faster, quicker guys who are younger.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just all said the same thing. He's the GOAT, and just the way that he finished that race, he looked strong coming down that final finish straight. So loved it. Now, Tim, one thing you didn't mention, there was a dead heat for third and fourth with Abdi Nagai. Now, Abdi was actually photographed by our good friend Reese in while he was out on a run before the race, but Abdi was initially given third, but then on review was given fourth. So just another little piece of trivia. So, and before you go on and talk about the wheelchair results, Jack Rayner and Brett Robinson, we were looking forward to this Australian tussle. Andy Buchanan, I think, is clearly the premier marathoner here in Australia at the moment. Just word on the other two, Jack Rayner was a late withdrawal from injury, and Brett Robinson was actually a pacemaker. He took a place, yeah. So he ran to 20, according to his Strava, he ran 22.6 kilometers at 1 hour and 8 minutes, and some of the comments on his Strava was pace to perfection. So he clearly had taken the money to be a pacemaker as opposed to racing the event. Now, I'll make two more comments once you've gone through the wheelchair.
That's right. In the women's wheelchair, Catherine De Bruyne, who came second in Boston 6 days earlier, won the women's wheelchair event. She beat Susanna Ciccone from the US, who won Boston. So there's a switch there. And again, she just came home strong, Catherine. She just managed that race really well. And no change in the men's event. Marcel Hug from Switzerland won it again in 1 hour 25, looking really strong. And I still can't believe those guys back it up week after week doing marathons in the wheelchair. They go from a really hilly course in Boston, and 6 days later, they've got their planes, they've got their chairs over into London. They've got rid of all the lactic acid in their shoulders and their neck and back and arms, and off they go again and have another crack at it. Just phenomenal what those guys do. Now, I haven't heard anything further about world records either being set for number of participants. I haven't heard if they got their 56,000 runners that they were looking to get. Have you guys heard anything?
I did see somewhere, I think they did get it, sorry, Tony, you go.
Yeah, I think someone was mentioning based on their results on the results page, it looked, but there's been nothing official from what I can understand. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Which will be cool. Now, the two other points I just want to make. Nike ambush marketing, right? So that's for those that watch the live stream, you would have seen right along the route there were big Nike signs making the most of the London Marathon. So depending on which way you look at it, congratulations to Nike or shame on you, Nike, whichever side of the fence you're on. Just really smart. And for everyone watching it, you would have thought the race was sponsored by Nike in some part. So very, very interesting. And just the other thing that I want to mention, global live streams for world majors. And we were on a stream last night on YouTube that we thought was going to die at any minute, right? And we were online with at least 40,000 other people watching that live stream. And I just think we are, I know there's FlowTrack where you can pay some ridiculous amount a month to get access to live streaming. And then there's, going through the VPN process and getting through to host. But someone needs to mention, and hopefully they can hear about it through us, to Abbott's, that there needs to be some way, a consistent way of having live streams for the world majors. We are seeing these world majors sell out in record time. Last night, 40,000 people were watching this live stream. That's a advertising opportunity if ever I saw one. So, geez, I'd love to see it, because what were we, an hour before the race, and we're saying, has anyone heard of a live stream? And we're all doing that because that's what we do. We watch marathons. So I just think there is an opportunity there to provide the public what they want. So
if I could just add,
I agree.
By the time the marathon finished, apparently about 500,000 people had entered the ballot for next year.
Good luck, Lucia and Tony, on getting in next year.
The rejects.
Can I say one last thing as well, and then I'll hand you over to Tara? I don't know about you guys, but those elites make it look way too easy. When you turn right off Tower Bridge and you hit the halfway point shortly thereafter, and then you got to go out through the Isle of the Dog and do the twists and turns through Canary Wharf and then back again. And you're watching these elites run through there, and they go past the halfway point, and then it seems like no time at all. They're already running past that same point, heading down onto the embankment, and you're just looking at it going, geez, they make that look easy, because that's not an easy part of the course. It drags on and on and on, and these guys are just hammering through there. It was just crazy.
Agreed.
Yeah, but that's it, Tara. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. So that was a very, very long news. So we're going to have to keep this next part very short, unfortunately, guys. But we're going to talk about our favourite topics on the show, which is the World Marathon Majors. As many of our listeners know, we have used travel providers like Travelling Fit to manage our travel and entry into each of the majors. We know that this is not the cheapest way to do it, but I do know for Tim and myself there are a lot of benefits for us in doing it this way. Basically, the travel providers look after everything, so all we needed to do was focus on training and the race itself. We know that this can be quite expensive, and not all runners out there can afford to travel this way. So tonight we're going to review each of the majors and discuss ways that we can look at to save some money along the way. However, before we do that, guys, in terms of ballpark figures alone, if you were to look back and count the dollars spent into getting into each of the events, what would you say would be the approximate amount for running the 6 majors plus or minus Sydney? Because we haven't done that yet, so we can only guesstimate that one. That's like for your time to pay for travel, accommodation, race entry, food, and all of that.
Can I just clarify on this question? Are we talking about just the major or including any pre and post travel connected to those majors? Because that's going to depend on the level of anxiety for my answer.
Okay, so you can put into your answer your pre and post travel, because don't forget, we're going to do it on the cheap on this episode. So you're doing it the way you've done it.
Someone else has to go first.
Yeah, look, I will. Each one of the majors we've done has always been tucked around a holiday. So really, really hard for me to sort of document the expenses, because Sharon looks after everything and I'm too scared to ask her what it's actually cost us. So, but I think conservatively, each one of, if it was just Sharon and I would say each one of the majors and associated holidays would have been maybe each one 10K. And I would certainly be, that's what I'm sort of thinking in my mind. Sharon, I don't need to know the real number. I'm sure that you've got all that organized, but yeah, I would imagine that's what it's cost us. So
yeah, it's not cheap. I know for us, it is somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 per trip for the two of us to travel that way, to travel on the planes, to stay in the hotels, to do the extra little bit of a holiday, or to stay a few extra nights in a city. I know, like London, we just went over, spent 2 or 3 days extra afterwards, and then came back. But it's still not cheap when you're taking into account accommodation, flights, food, You got to remember, accommodation is always at peak prices in those big cities at those times because there's major races on. But yeah, I would say conservatively for the two of us, it'd be $15,000 to $20,000 per trip.
And I'd probably say similar for me because I don't do things on a small scale, as we know, but I don't regret any of the trips I've done. And also being a single traveler, I always have to pay the single supplement costs, which is extra. I did it in London because I shared with a friend, but every other time I've always had my own room. So that does add an additional cost to it. Yes, I'd say minimum 15 baseline.
Yeah.
Or if
So,
not, sorry, Tim.
So just on that, Lucia, so when you talk about a room cost, you've elected when you've travelled with, say, Travelling Fit to go for a room by yourself, but Travelling Fit does offer a cheaper option where you can have 2 single beds in the room and share with a stranger, yeah?
Correct. But I'm one of those ones that unless I know the person, I don't want to share with them because sometimes I can have crap everywhere. Sometimes I'm neat and tidy, and I don't want to have that thought of thinking, okay, I always have to be tidy. So it was my choice to pay that single supplement. But Tim, as you correctly said, Travelling Fit does offer that option.
Excellent. And Lucia, no offense, but I've been traveling with you before, and I've never seen a neat and tidy hotel room of yours ever. So that's between you and I, obviously. But yes. Let's get on to the real subject. So I just want to be a bit of a disclaimer here. Further to what we're going to discuss shortly, there is an element of risk with doing things on the cheap. So, for instance, going with the ballots will mean that you are only paying for the race entry with no added or margin, but there is a risk that you won't be able to get into the race that year that you want to run it, or you won't be able to run it with the people that you want to run it with. Likewise, paying the cheap plane tickets or accommodations means that there is a risk that the flights can be delayed or cancelled, or accommodation may be overbooked or cancelled as well. So these things can happen at the last minute, especially with Airbnbs or overbooking of flights. So while we're talking about saving money tonight, it is also important to understand that saving money can often lead to an increased risk of things going wrong and not necessarily happening in the way that you want them to happen with your plans. So just keeping that in mind. But we're going to talk about the majors in chronological order. So we're going to start with the Tokyo Marathon. And no matter which time of the year you travel to Tokyo, it's always expensive. So Tokyo Marathon is actually in March. It is a very expensive city for accommodation and food, no matter which way you look at it. So looking at travel costs, accommodation costs, and food, guys, how would you suggest you travel a little bit more cheaply there?
I actually got lucky with Tokyo because I didn't do Tokyo through Travelling Fit. I was one of the lucky people that the Tokyo Marathon Foundation, they do a virtual run every couple of months. So I think it's maybe about every 6 to 8 weeks. And you have to run a half marathon distance over a 10-day period. You have to pay a fee, I think it was like maybe $20 or something. And then if you completed the distance, you went into a draw. And I entered 2 of them, didn't have any luck. But on the third time, myself and one of my friends from Melbourne, Nadine, we both got a spot by doing that virtual challenge. We still had to pay our race entry, but it saved us money having to go through a travel company. Yes, we did have to find our own hotel and stuff like that, but at least that cut down the cost a little bit. So ironically, Tokyo was probably one of the cheaper majors I've done.
Yeah, it is interesting. Accommodation-wise in Tokyo can be quite challenging, right? So you have Western-style hotels, and there's a number of them. They're generally your American branded or your European branded hotels, your Hyatts and those sort of companies. And they're set up like a Western hotel with beds and showers and all that sort of stuff. You then also have Japanese family style apartments or hotels, which are more simpler sort of rooms, smaller type rooms, and quite often have futons on the floors. And then you have your traditional Japanese ryokan style accommodation, which is full traditional Japanese, but rice paper walls and things like that. So you need to be very careful which style you're going to choose, and be mindful when you're booking the hotel to read the fine print to make sure you actually understand the style of accommodation you're getting in Japan, because it can be quite challenging. The other thing to be mindful of, if you are looking at hotels, size does matter a little bit, and hotel rooms are generally quite small. I know the one we stay in normally, KO Plaza, they're big style, Western style rooms. But for other hotels that I've stayed in Tokyo over the years, they can be very small, very pokey. I don't even fit into showers. I don't fit into, well, they don't even have bathtubs. And if they do, they're more like a footwell for the shower. They're very small, like to the point where the bed is the only thing that fits in the room. And that's about it. And I know, Tara, we stayed in one like that in a previous trip as well. The other options you have for accommodation, which is cheaper, are their capsule style accommodation that they have, which are rent a capsule by the night. A number of people do that in Japan. I have heard of stories of people running marathons that way. They're safe, they're secure, they are shared showers and bathroom facilities, but all you get is a bed in a capsule, essentially. So it depends what you're wanting to. There is some options there to go cheap. There are Airbnbs and other things, but as Tara said, buyer beware when you get those. It doesn't mean that they'll be available on race day. They're sort of my tips on the accommodation there. I don't know about what you guys have got for any other cheap ideas in Tokyo.
I actually found the exchange rate was really good when we did Tokyo in 2024, and it was 2024, and food and drinks were relatively cheap for us. So I found that was quite a bonus. But Tim, you're right about the hotel rooms. There is a vast difference because we had the family there and we tacked on a holiday. There's a couple of things the Japanese do really, really well. Toilets are one. I love their toilets. Just give me one of their toilets any day of the week. But also one thing that I think is they make use of their space. So another thing that we saw that they did really well in some of the smaller motel rooms, because they make most of their spaces, the bed's higher, and that means you can put your suitcases in underneath. So don't be scared off by the size of the rooms, because there are some ways, and there are ways that is quite ingenious how they use the space. But yeah, from an exchange point of view, I think food and drink was actually relatively cheap for us. But yeah.
I highly recommend the 7-Eleven shops for food, because you can get really good sandwiches, you can get really good hot food, cold food. They've got a good array of everything, and it is a very good price there too. So if you are looking for the cheaper food, you can find that. And there is things like ramen along on the food side of things on the street as well. So they have little street stalls with ramen and traditional Japanese food, very cheap as well. So it is quite cheap.
You pay about $10, $15 for a big bowl of steaming hot ramen that will fill you up for the day, and you don't need much more than that for the day.
And there's a place called Donkey or Don Quixote, and they do some very cheap things. So if you do need toiletries and stuff like that over there, highly recommend going to a place called Don Quixote, or they call it Donkey, and that can get you a cheap thing as well. So going on next is Boston. That's the middle of April, and that's the first of the US trips for us here in Australia, and it's the longest travel time from the east coast of Australia. What tips have you guys got that is cheap for Boston?
Probably from two tips. One that I did myself was I saved my freaking fly points, and I did my flights on points, and so that saved me about $2,000, which I was able to put towards the cost of the package. So if you can if you know you're going to be doing a major, or if not, if that's your plan, start saving frequent flyer points, because that's a good way to cut down on costs. And I've had some friends do this that didn't get through. That were able to qualify. They stayed just a bit further out, so they stayed in places like one of my friends. I think she stayed a 15-minute subway ride. So she made sure that she stayed close enough to a hotel that was within walking distance to a subway station that would bring her to where she had to be. And she's done that on quite a few marathons, and that has saved her quite a lot.
Yep.
Sorry, you go, Tara.
I was just going to say also with Boston, you can actually do some really cheap food in Boston as well. So just be aware that you don't have to eat at the prime restaurants. There is cheaper restaurants. And if you go to places like Quincy Hall and Faneuil Hall, they actually have some really good food for quite cheap as well.
Yeah.
And the cheesecake.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah. I was also going to say, if you stay out of the Back Bay area, exactly what Lucia said, Back Bay area is where the finish line is. It's where the main expo and everything is. But if you stay closer to where Faneuil Hall is, we found the accommodation there was cheaper. We checked out of the Western hotel that we were in with Travelling Fit and moved into a Hyatt hotel, albeit it was a Hyatt-centric hotel, which is a middle-of-the-road hotel. We stayed in there, and it was about almost a third of the price less than where we were staying at Back Bay per night. So it was a bit cheaper. On top of that, public transport is good in Boston. There's a free bus that takes you from the airport to central places in Boston. There's a couple of free buses that get you there. And then in addition to that, when flying to the east coast of the US, the traditional route for Australians is Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, LA, and then LA straight across to the east coast. There are other options. I noticed some friends of ours traveling this year went via Dubai, and there's other routes, including via Singapore, which may be cheaper. And I know people have gone via Vancouver as well.
We went via Honolulu. Yeah, we went via Honolulu with Hawaiian Airlines, so that was much more economical from our research too. So.
Yeah, and unless you're going to qualify for Boston, there is no ballot as far as I'm aware. So it is pretty much a case of you can fundraise, get in through a tour operator, or you can qualify. So my number one thing there would be to run really, really fast if you don't want to be paying for a tour operator. Next is London, and so that's just 6 days after Boston. You can actually knock Boston and London off together because it would actually be cheaper enough to do if you want to save on the flights and stuff. However, maybe you guys want to expand on that one for me.
I think with London, it's very similar to Boston. As long as you stay, you can stay somewhere not as close to the finish, because I would recommend staying closer to the finish rather than closer to the start. And so that way you can do any touristy things and stuff like that. But as long as you're staying close, if you are going to stay just a little bit out, make sure you're close to a tube station. And so that way you can get in and out quickly, because the London transport system, the tube system, it may look confusing at first when you look at it, but then when you work out where you have to go, it's actually not that bad. So I would recommend, to save some money, stay just a little bit further out, not right in central London, but as long as you're close to a tube station.
Yeah, London's one of those cities, isn't it, Lucia, that whenever you're anywhere near the tourist hotspots in the city, the iconic landmarks, it's going to cost you more money. So staying further away from those in suburbia would be a better way to do it. In addition to that, eating it, a lot of the supermarkets in the UK have really good hot meals and good food in them, sandwiches and things like that. Is it Primrose and what's the main one? Marks and Spencer have really good sandwiches. Yeah. So pretty cheap food at a reasonable cost. But you got to remember you're paying everything in pounds. So from an Australian perspective, you're paying almost 2.5 times as much in pounds as you would be in dollars. But it can be done a bit cheaper staying out, definitely. Using public transport, again, trains from the airport, the Heathrow Express is a very quick and efficient way of getting you to the main areas. It's cheaper than a taxi and cheaper than Uber or anything like that. So not a bad way to go. And yeah, the app you use for the tube is called the TfL, Transport for London app, and it will give you all the details to make that tube system a lot easier.
And we could also be like Tony and get a rejection letter every single year if you want to go on through the ballot. That can work for some people. I don't personally know of anybody who's gotten through the ballot, although Tony might be my next lucky person. So,
Lucia.
Lucia.
Right. Reject number 10 coming my way. Bring it on.
Tony, have you got any cheap London tips?
No, not really. I'm just looking at the current exchange rate. So £1 is equal to 209 Australian dollars. So, and that just hurts. So you know you're not going to get a lot. So everything that's been said, staying a little bit further away, utilizing public transport, utilizing supermarkets, I think is a general tip for all of our 6-star majors. Try and get as much stuff at supermarket rates. It doesn't. If you don't have to eat out every night while you're in a city, and feel very comfortable having porridge in your hotel room. So yeah, so London's expensive. So
yeah, and as you said, Tara, bundling it up with Boston allows you to then get a return around the world airline ticket, and they're generally cheaper. And they just require, I think it's 3 or 4 stops you need to make. So you'd go London, Brisbane, LA, or Vancouver, Boston, London, and then Singapore or Dubai on the way home, which would give you around the world ticket, which is it's about a third cheaper, I think, buying around the world ticket than it is to buy all the individual legs.
Yep. So, I mean, you're paying for accommodation either way, so it works quite well. I guess after London is going to be our cheapest one. So that's going to be Sydney for us. So for us, we're actually looking forward to this one. It's very cheap. Flights are extremely cheap for us, and we can get them on frequent flyers, as Lucia said. Lucia is a local. She doesn't even have to pay for flights or accommodation because her house is almost on the course. So have we got any tips there, Tony, you've run and done Sydney before. So as somebody who actually has to travel for it, what's your tips?
I think Sydney for us is just a godsend that it's there, and it might be one of those things that many people will try and do every year. So just to get that major boost that we probably need. But Sydney's drivable. You could drive from Brisbane there as long as you've got some time up in your annual leave. You can stay once again as long as you're close to a train station, a metro station. Sorry. It's quite easy to get into the city, and it's quite easy to get to the start line there at North Sydney. Once again, most of the Australian units, I'd imagine, are going to have some sort of a mini fridge or a microwave potentially. I know where we stayed at North Sydney was a very much a self-contained unit, so we were laughing where we were. So, but interestingly, Robert Wang on the Facebook Abbott's group has put together his pricing that he's now put out there. He's coming to Sydney, so looking forward to seeing you, Robert. And overall, I think $1,500 for a return flight from where he is in the US. I think that's US dollars, of course. So that doesn't sound too bad. So maybe Sydney for a lot of people is going to be a little bit cheaper. So.
And Luch, have you got any suggestions for food or any other cheap ideas there?
Just to circle back on what Tony mentioned with the metro, I would recommend staying at a hotel that is on the metro line, because it will make getting to race morning that much easier, because they do put on extra services early in the morning. And it's like once you get to Victoria Cross, it's not even a 5-minute walk to the race precinct. So definitely stay at a location that is walking distance to a metro station. But in terms of cheap eats, again, like something which Tim mentioned earlier, supermarkets will be your best friend. Like, so at least like if you want to make your own sandwiches, salads, or just have frozen meals, which maybe not necessarily are the most nutritious, but it will be more cost effective. So unfortunately, we don't have anything like Pret a Manger, like in terms of pre-packed sandwiches or anything like that. But supermarkets, you can get good bargains.
Yep, and I know that places like, not trying to advertise for Coles or Woolies, but they do have salads that are already pre-packed and sandwiches, hot roast chickens, things like that you can just pick up and make a salad or a chicken thing with or something like that. So we've also got about 4 weeks after Sydney, we have Berlin in late September. From memory, Berlin was actually probably the most difficult one for us as Brisbaneites to get to. There was no direct flights into Berlin, maybe one or two, but it was like we had to do multiple stopovers for us. So especially to save some money. Has anyone else got some suggestions there on what we can do to save money?
What I did was I actually had a stopover in London, and then because not many airlines fly internationally into Berlin, I've seen some people fly into Frankfurt and then get a train from Frankfurt to Berlin because that's another cheap way to do it, and also a scenic way to do it. So I think if I had my time again, I would probably fly into another city in Germany and then get the train to Berlin.
It's a great idea. Yep. Tony?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Tim.
I was just going to say the trip is difficult. The only way you can get there from Australia is with Qatar Airlines via Doha, and that flies direct in there. But anyone else, whether it's Emirates, whether it's Qantas, they all go to other destinations in Europe first. So, yeah, catching the train across Europe is probably the cheaper option. It does take a little bit longer, but it's a little bit more scenic and a bit more comfortable than sitting on an aeroplane as well. Once you're in Berlin, we didn't find it that expensive food-wise and beer-wise. We drank a lot of beer in Berlin before and after. But, yeah, I don't think it was that expensive. They have Audi shops, or what do they call them? Are they Audi? No, Audi Nord, I think they're called over there.
Lidl?
They have Lidl as well, but they had Audi Nord, which is the northern version of Audi. We get the southern version of Audi. And there was cheap food and cheap alcohol in there, and it was all fresh food as well, which we found was quite useful as well.
Yeah, beer is cheaper than water. So in Berlin, for some strange reason. But yeah, a lot of the runners in the UK will fly into a Hamburg or a Frankfurt or a Munich and then train it into Berlin. So there just must be something about Berlin airport that makes it really, really expensive. I know when we flew out, because we did Berlin and Chicago together, and we had to fly through Finland. So we went from Berlin to Finland to Chicago. So current exchange rate is €1 equals 1.77 Aussie dollars. So just to give you a bit of a heads up.
Excellent. So I guess that moves us on then to Chicago, as Tony said. For you, Tony, the timing worked out brilliantly. So you could just travel straight from Munich and then do the Oktoberfest, obviously, with us, and then straight over to Chicago. And I know Reese is doing that this year as well. So that is a really good way to save some money as well, because you're able to then package that deal like what we were talking about with London and Boston earlier. Tony, you're a bit of an expert at this one. So what else have you got for your suggestions for making that one cheap?
I actually found it interesting because we had people in our group at Chicago who had run Berlin, and they found it was cheaper for them to fly home than what it was to fly to Chicago, and with the additional accommodation. So really interesting. You'd have to do your sums on whether it's worth it, because there's a 2-week period. So there is additional accommodation that you do need to cover. We loved it because we were going to Chicago for a bit of a holiday as well. So we had, I think we said goodbye to you guys, I think on Tuesday after Oktoberfest, and we were in Chicago on the Wednesday, quite sick, unfortunately, for the first day or so. But yeah, we'd stayed in, I've forgotten the name of it, I think it's called Home Suites, and they are awesome. Once again, self-contained. We were able to not be quite in the city. We were down near the Nike flagship store in whatever that street's called. I don't have a great eye for detail. I just know how to get to places. But yeah, that was relatively affordable. It wouldn't be for everyone. And yeah, so we just enjoyed our time until it was time to move into, I think we had, so Wednesday we were there for almost a week in the home suites before we went into the hotel that Traveling Fit had organized. So yeah, we found it was the best way to do it, to tack both of them on. But after the marathon, we were very, very glad to be jumping on the plane and heading home, to be honest. So it's a long time away.
Chicago's a very walkable city as well, so it makes it a great way to see the city just by walking it around if you don't want to catch that public transport, just to save that little bit of extra money as well there. Lucia and Tim?
I was just going to say the food in Chicago, we struggled with to find cheapest sort of stuff. There's a lot of fine dining, I guess, because we stayed right in the city area, and we struggled to find cheap food. It was a lot of fine dining areas. We found a few little supermarkets here and there, but not a lot of cheap stuff from memory, Tara, when we were walking around it. And even along the river, where you'd think you'd want to go and find a spot to have a cup of coffee or a quick bite to eat, there wasn't much that we could find along the river there for us. It may have been the timing of the year. It was starting to get into that winter season when they start to close up. I don't know, but it was a struggle. And I think we found a bar and we went to it 2 nights in a row for dinner because we found it was probably the easiest and cheapest and best place to get into, but it still wasn't the cheapest.
Yeah, we had a really good Sunday afternoon, I think it might have been Sunday or Saturday, in a sports bar on opposite. So yeah, on the side that we were staying initially, and I won't say very inexpensive, but very affordable. So sit there and have some pub grub, watch the Chicago Bears who are playing down at Soldier Field on the telly there, and just be surrounded by locals. It was a great experience. So, but we on the side where we initially stayed, because there's sort of that side on one side of the river, and then where we stayed with Traveling Fit. So there was a couple of little Whole Foods around the place that were quite affordable. So you've just got to go looking, I guess. And we were lucky. We were in a home suite, so we could cook pretty much anything that we wanted to at home. So we didn't eat out a lot when it was just Sharon and I. But good memories from that bar.
I also got breakfast items and snacks from CVS and Target, because Target in the States is not like Target in Australia, where you can actually buy groceries. So that's where I bought cereals, bananas, yogurts and stuff like that, just so I didn't have to buy breakfast every morning and to save some money.
Yep, perfect. So I guess the next one, we've got New York, and look, that's a long distance away from Australia. We bundled our Chicago and New York up together. However, that was an expensive trip for us. We also did Canada at the same time. So we had traveled half of America, some of Canada, and then before going back to New York. So it was very expensive for us. But there is some way to provide cheaper airfares, and I guess that would be doing the points, like what Lucia's talked about. New York is an expensive city. It doesn't matter how cheap you want to make New York. It is an expensive city. So please be aware that New York is expensive. Any other suggestions there, guys?
You can probably eat. New York's one of those places where food-wise, if you want to go top end, high scale, you can. If you want to grab a slice of pizza for $2, if they're still that price, you can do that.
No. About $7 or $8 now for the slice of pizza when we were there.
Well, I managed to get some cheaper than that when I went last year.
Oh, did you? Yeah. We were struggling.
It's got Italian cheese on it, so there's a tariff, and then there's a Australian.
They knew the runners are in town, Lucia. So,
but you still get the food. You still get the food carts on the sidewalk. There's still cheaper options, but it's not as cheap as it once was. By the sounds of it, when we were there, it was quite expensive. But yeah, there are cheaper options, but it's a challenge. And don't Uber anywhere. Use the subway system. It's cheap. I think what was it? If you use the equivalent of $32 worth of travel in a week, every $35 every trip after that is free. So it's not a bad deal. It's that's open to everyone who lives there. And I guess the other one, just bundling them up as we did Chicago and New York. It doesn't have to be expensive like what Tara and I did. You can do a homestay somewhere like Tony did. If you go to some of the smaller states, you can do it, and it'll be a little bit cheaper if you're in a location slightly out of the big cities. You can stay there for a month and do it pretty cheaply, I would think.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to get around, whether it's walking or subways. So you can, don't catch Ubers, don't hire a car. And currently the $1 is equal to 156 Australian. So that's probably not a bad deal based on everything that's going on.
And I guess the other thing that I'll just add at the very end here is don't do Lucia and spend everything at the expo. If you want to save money, I would highly recommend just going into the expo, picking up your bib and getting out again if you want to save money. You don't have to have 40,000 t-shirts. No, I think all of these places you can buy a finisher shirt if you really want one. Some of them give them to you. However, if you're just there to run the race and you don't care about the merch, don't go to the expo apart from pick up your bib and your race number. Yep.
Yeah. Can I just add some general tips? Because when Tim proposed this thing, I'm thinking, how do we make these marathons cheaper? Because at the end of the day, there's going to be a cost. But I did do some general tips, right? So please bear with me while I just go. The first one you've already alluded to, merchandise. Don't be Lucia. Understand what it is that you want. So yes, I've got a jacket from every major except the very first one that I did, but I made up for that by getting it in New York. So how often will I wear those jackets? Very rarely. But I've also got beanies and caps, right? So the caps have just become another running cap. Some of the lettering from my Boston cap's fallen off. So, just be very, very selective in what it is that you want. Understand, get a T-shirt, awesome. If you want a jacket, go for it. But just don't go crazy because everyone else is going crazy. Set your limit and be really selective. So the other thing that Tim sort of talked about a bit as well is rail passes. Just in every location, there's going to be a way that you can make public transport even cheaper. So I know in Tokyo, you can get Japan rail passes, you can get other passes, etc., etc. So please do your research around that. Don't catch an Uber from the airport. Unless you're made of money, there is always going to be a better public transport option, and some of that can even be free. And just in terms of plane tickets, if you're not phased about it, what do they call it when you land in one place and head out of the other? So if you're going through Dubai, there's normally a window of time.
Transit.
If you're not,
transit.
Yeah. So if you're not phased about that, sometimes if you're happy to put up with the 4 or 5 hour changeover or you can get the airfares can often be cheaper. So just look for it, do your research and see what you can do. I know that whenever we're given a 2-hour window now to change over, I say, Sharon, no, because we've had bad experience with that. We go minimum 4 and we always end up getting a cheaper flight due to it. So, and we can keep ourselves company. Sharon's always yelling at me.
Flying at odd times also helps, Tony. So if you're willing, if you want to leave at midnight on a flight or 11 o'clock at night, it will generally be a cheaper flight than the one that takes off at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Any other tips there before we head on to the end of the segments? No? Excellent. All right. So I guess that's done as much as we can for the cheapness of things, but we're going to go for a tip from Tim. So, Tim, what is your tip this week?
All right. Thanks, Tara. I'm mindful of time. So my tip's on the other side. So we talked about it before about added on trips. And for us and for Tara and myself, and it sounds like Tony and Lucia as well, it's about rewarding yourself for the efforts you put in and having that holiday and that break afterwards. So don't forget to reward yourself. Spend some time in the city that you're going to or the country that you're going to. Explore it. But there is a cheaper way you can do it as well. Using things like park runs is a great way to doing cheap sightseeing and running events in the country. You get to meet people at the park run events. They're friendly and accommodating, as we've talked about before. But quite often you can then talk to the locals about some of the tourist hotspots that you can go and see and do and make new friends along the way. So we've done park runs in all the 6 countries we've been to, Tara, and we've loved every bit of it. We've loved doing all the park runs everywhere we go, talking to the locals, finding out about new little tourist spots, or even if it's just a spot to go to for lunch or breakfast, really handy. So don't forget to reward yourself. Stay in the country, but you can do it cheap and you can do things like parkrun, which are free. So I'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that tip, Tim. So this episode is about to end, but before we do that, Tony, what is on for us next week?
Well, next week, Tara, we're starting a 2-part series, which is going to help us step up in distance. And this is something I certainly need at the moment because even though I've done an 18K long run in recent memory, it is recent memory. So it'll be good to follow some of the tips that come out of this. So next week for part 1, we're going to talk about how you can step up from running a 5K park run to running a half marathon. So we're going to share our knowledge and experience and talk about the highs and the lows, share our tips. You know, we really do enjoy running. Oh, I'm going to say most of my runs I enjoy. There are some that I seriously do not enjoy. And I'm being really open and frank about that. So while we love running, there are sometimes running does not love me. So, and the half marathon is often a real massive challenge. And that's my next challenge coming up, actually, is the Brisbane Half Marathon. So in the following week's episode, we'll talk about stepping up from half marathon to full marathon. So next week, 5K to half, and then we'll do another follow-up from half to full. On both episodes, we're going to share our ideal training strategies, plans, fueling tips, and all you need to know. As usual, it's going to be another fantastic episode because you are listening to the only podcast that has 4 6-star major marathon medalists. So, awesome. Back to you, Tara.
Lovely. Thanks for that, Tony. So that concludes the show for this week. I've really enjoyed this episode and sharing with you all how we can save some dollars and to be able to do the things that we love to do, and especially being the majors, they are expensive. I'd also like to thank my co-host for joining me tonight. So thank you all for being here and sharing your memories. I hope you all have a fantastic week ahead and you get better soon, Lucia. We love making these podcasts for you, our listeners. Your feedback means the world to us. So like, comment, or message us on Instagram, Facebook, or Messenger, or email us at happyrunning@flyingrunner.com. And if you've got any tips, please, would love to hear from them. Or if you'd like to let us know what the episode 100 should be, definitely throw that out there for us. You can watch this episode on Spotify and YouTube, or listen on Apple, Amazon, and all other major podcast platforms. Remember that every step forward is a victory. Lace up, hit the road, and we'll see you at the next time on the Flying Runner podcast. Happy running.
Happy running.
Be running. Bye.